Her twins needed bone marrow. The match was their billionaire CEO father who denied them. He let them start dying 3 weeks before I found out. That's what the doctor told me when she turned the clipboard around, and I saw his name. Carl Brown. Billionaire. CEO. The man who walked out the day I told him I was pregnant with twins. For 9 years, my daughters asked why their father didn't want them. I lied and said he was just scared. But when Betty and Daisy got sick, when their bone marrow stopped working, and the registry said he was the only match in the world, he saw their names and clicked decline. He knew. And he chose nothing. So I walked into his glass tower, past his security, into his boardroom full of men in expensive suits, and I made him look at pictures of the girls who were dying because he was too much of a coward to face what he'd made. The fluorescent lights in Dr. Hartsfield's office hummed like a funeral dirge. Lisa Blake sat across from him, her purse clutched so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She'd known something was wrong for weeks, the bruising on Daisy's legs that wouldn't fade, Betty's exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix, the nosebleeds that came without warning. But nothing prepared her for the words that came next. "Mrs. Blake, Dr. Hartsfield began, his voice carrying the weight of every terrible conversation he'd ever had to deliver. The tests came back. Betty and Daisy have a rare blood disorder called aplastic anemia. Their bone marrow has stopped producing healthy blood cells." The room tilted. Lisa heard herself speak, but the voice didn't sound like hers. "What does that mean?" The doctor's pause lasted forever. "It means without a bone marrow transplant, their bodies will shut down. We're looking at weeks, maybe a few months if we're fortunate." Weeks. Her babies, who still left crayon drawings on the fridge, who fought over who got the window seat, who giggled in their shared bedroom past bedtime, had weeks. "We've already started searching," Dr. Hartsfield continued, pulling up records on his computer. "We tested you. Of course. Your sister. We ran their profiles through the National Registry. 17 million potential donors." He looked at her with something that might have been pity. "No matches." Lisa's chest constricted. "That's impossible. Someone has to." "There is one possibility." The doctor's tone shifted. "We found a potential match in our system. A very strong one, actually. But," he hesitated, and that hesitation felt like glass in her throat. He declined further contact. Everything in Lisa went cold. "Show me." Dr. Hartsfield turned his monitor around, and there it was. The name that had haunted her for 9 years. Carl Brown. The man she'd loved. The man who'd built a fortune while she raised his daughters in a one-bedroom apartment. The man who'd looked her in the eye and said, "I can't afford a scandal right now," the day she told him she was carrying his twins. Lisa's hands started shaking not from fear, but from a rage so pure it burned. The memory crashed over her like a wave she'd been holding back for nearly a decade. 9 years earlier. They'd been in his penthouse back when she still believed in the version of Carl who whispered promises into her hair at 2 a.m., who talked about the life they'd build together once Brown Tech went public. "I'm pregnant," she told him, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her. Twins. Carl had gone pale. Not the good kind of pale, the kind that meant he was calculating, measuring, protecting something more valuable than her. "Lisa." He'd paced to the window, unable to even look at her. "The IPO is in 3 months. The board is watching everything. My investors, your investors?" She'd laughed, but it came out broken. "Carl, we're talking about our children. I can't have a family right now." He said it like he was declining a meeting. "The timing is impossible. A scandal like this would destroy everything I've built." "There's no scandal," she'd shot back, her voice rising. "There are your daughters." But he was already shaking his head, already retreating into the version of himself that only cared about valuations and market share and what the Wall Street Journal would say. "I'll send money," he'd offered, like that would fix the hole he was tearing through her chest. "Whatever you need, but I can't. I'm not ready for this." She'd stared at him, this man she thought she knew, and realized she'd been in love with a ghost. "Then don't come back," she'd whispered. And he hadn't. Present day. "Mrs. Blake?" Dr. Hartsfield's voice pulled her back to the present, to the office that smelled like antiseptic and devastation. He declined the test? Lisa asked, her voice dangerously quiet. He saw the request, checked the box marked "No further contact." Of course he did. Because Carl Brown didn't do things that were inconvenient. He didn't do things that required him to face the consequences of his choices. But this time was different. This time, his denial had a body count. Lisa stood, her legs steadier than they should have been. She'd worked double shifts as a nurse and a weekend caterer to keep Betty and Daisy fed, clothed, and safe. She'd stayed up through fevers and nightmares. She'd been both mother and father for 9 years. She would crawl through hell itself before she let Carl Brown's cowardice kill her daughters. "Where is his office?" she asked. Dr. Hartsfield blinked. "I'm sorry? Carl Brown. Where does he work?" "Mrs. Blake, I don't think confronting him is." "Doctor." Lisa's voice cut through the air like a scalpel. "My daughters are dying. Their father is the only person who can save them. And he already said no." "That's so." She leaned forward, and for the first time since the diagnosis, she felt something other than fear. She felt clarity. "So I'm going to walk into his billion-dollar tower, interrupt whatever meaningless meeting he's in, and make him look at pictures of the daughters he's been pretending don't exist. And then I'm going to ask him to his face if he can live with letting them die." Dr. Hartsfield said nothing. What could he say? Lisa grabbed her purse and headed for the door. But she paused at the threshold, her hand on the frame, her voice dropping to something almost conversational. "He walked away once. He doesn't get to walk away again." The door closed behind her with a finality that sounded like a promise, or a threat. "Now, if you've ever been dismissed by someone who should have protected you, if you've ever had to be both the fighter and the comforter because nobody else showed up, then you understand what Lisa was feeling in that moment. This is the kind of story that doesn't let go. The kind where every chapter makes you feel something you didn't expect. If you want to see how far a mother's love can push back against a father's cowardice, make sure you're subscribed. Because what happens next will make you believe in second chances or make you question if some people deserve them at all. Hit that subscribe button. You'll want to be here for what comes next. What Lisa didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Carl had seen the donor request 3 weeks earlier. He'd stared at the last name Blake for a full minute, and then he'd clicked decline without reading further. Because some truths are easier to bury than face. But Lisa Blake was done letting him bury anything. She was about to drag every truth he'd buried into the light. And Carl Brown's carefully constructed empire was about to discover what happened when a mother had nothing left to lose. Carl Brown's empire began every morning at 5:30 a.m. on the dot. By 5:31, his penthouse curtains parted with a soft mechanical hum, flooding the room with pale city light. Skyscrapers pierced the dawn like glass and steel spears, and somewhere 87 floors below, people were already hurrying into buildings stamped with his name. Brown Tech Innovations. On paper, Carl controlled markets, dictated trends, bent governments just enough to get what he needed. In magazines, he was the golden boy of tech's sharp jawline, silvering hair that only made him look more distinguished, those gray eyes people always said could read a balance sheet, and a human being with the same cold accuracy. No one ever asked if those eyes knew how to look back. Really look back. He swung his legs out of bed and set his feet on heated marble. No scattered toys, no tiny socks, no school shoes lined up by the door. Just silence, broken only by the low murmur of the news anchor's voice from the wall-mounted TV. Overnight markets rallied after. He muted it with a flick of the remote. Carl didn't need the sound. He already knew what the numbers were. He'd been up until midnight reviewing European projections, then up again at 3, staring at the ceiling, replaying a single word he refused to say out loud. Blake. He shoved it away and moved through the motions. Shower at 5:35. Perfectly tailored navy suit at 5:50. Espresso at 6. The house staff floated in and out, invisible, practiced at never making eye contact unless spoken to. "Good morning, Mr. Brown," his house manager, Robert, said as he set down the silver tray. Carl nodded, already scrolling through overnight reports on his tablet. algorithms, acquisitions, risk assessments, all the things he was comfortable measuring, quantifying, controlling. Behind the numbers, behind the polished steel of his coffee machine, a memory tried to claw its way up. Twin girls. A last name. He turned the tablet brightness higher, as if data could blind him. "Car will be ready in 10, sir," Robert added. "Fine," Carl replied, voice neutral, always neutral. By 6:30, he was in the back of his black sedan, city streaming past in a blur of headlights and glass. He glanced once at the pedestrians queued for the crosswalk, their breath fogging in the cold morning air. A woman holding a little girl's hand, pink backpack bouncing. Carl looked away before the image could connect to anything human. "Board report?" he asked. From the front seat, his security chief, Sherman, passed a slim folder back without turning around. Sherman wasn't just security. He was gatekeeper, firewall, the human version of deny access. "Today's agenda," Sherman said. Q3 projections. European expansion. The press wants a comment on the new data privacy bill. "Draft something about innovation and responsibility," Carl said, flipping through the papers. "Have legal sign-off. I don't want surprises." He never did. Surprises were for people whose lives weren't scheduled in 15-minute blocks. At 6:55, they pulled into the private underground garage beneath Brown Tech headquarters, a gleaming tower that clawed at the sky. All mirrored glass and clean lines. Employees funneled through the main entrance above, scanning badges, adjusting ties, tucking hair behind ears. Carl used the back entrance. Always. Inside, the lobby looked like the future had decided to dress in marble. High ceilings. Abstract art worth more than most people's homes. A giant digital display looping footage of Brown Tech's latest innovations. Medical AI, data infrastructure, security systems, save lives, connect the world, protect what matters. The irony would have been funny if it didn't cut so close. Employees straightened when he stepped out of the elevator into the executive floor. Conversations died mid-sentence. Laughter snapped shut like a door. "Good morning, Mr. Brown," they chorused, each from a safe distance. They treated him like glass and ice, beautiful, dangerous, easily shattered if handled wrong. "Morning," he replied, moving past them with his usual measured stride. Not unkind, just unreachable. On his desk, 3 neatly stacked piles waited. Blue for urgent, gray for important, white for delegate. No photos, no personal knickknacks, numbers, contracts, performance charts. A framed cover of a business magazine naming him Man of the Decade. That was the only face in his office. By 7:15, his assistant, Kennedy, slipped in with his second espresso and the day's printed brief. She was competent, quiet, and careful not to pry. "Board starts at 9, she said. "Sherman's got your updated security report. And there's one unusual item on today's requests." He didn't look up. "Define unusual." "Someone's been calling repeatedly, asking to schedule an in-person meeting," she said. "Refuses to state the full details. Insists it's urgent and personal." He signed his name at the bottom of a contract. "Put them through legal. If it's real, they'll filter it." Kennedy hesitated just a fraction of a second, but long enough for him to notice. "She's already been to legal, sir. They directed her here." His pen paused. "She?" he repeated. "Yes." Kennedy adjusted her glasses. "She gave a name, but Sherman asked to brief you himself." There it was again, that faint, almost imperceptible tightening in his chest. "Like the warning before a storm, you can't see yet." "Send him in," Carl said, setting his pen down. Sherman entered with the ease of a man who had walked into rooms right before explosions and remained standing afterward. Broad-shouldered, mid-50s, ex-military, loyal, efficient, paid very well not to flinch. "You have something for me?" Carl asked. "Yes, sir." Sherman held a slim folder, like the one he'd passed in the car. Only this one wasn't color-coded. "A woman has been requesting a meeting for the last 48 hours, Sherman said. "Multiple calls, multiple emails, showed up at reception yesterday afternoon, again this morning." Security turned her away. Good, Carl said. Keep it that way. I don't reward persistence. It sets a bad precedent. Sherman didn't move. Her name, he said carefully, is Lisa Blake. The air in the room changed. It was subtle. A shift in pressure. The hum of the ventilation suddenly too loud. The glass windows felt closer, as if the entire city were leaning in to hear what he'd say. Carl's jaw clenched. For a second, a single second, he wasn't the unshakable CEO who'd been on magazine covers and keynote stages. He was a younger man in a penthouse living room, hearing the words, "I'm pregnant," and choosing himself over everything else. He forced his expression back into place. Neutral. Controlled. Just another item on the agenda. You spoke to her? Carl asked. Yes, Sherman replied. She said she needed to talk to you about your daughters. The word hit harder than any market crash ever could. Daughters. He could have argued with pregnancy. He could have rationalized situation. But daughters made it real. Made it plural. Made it 9 years too late. I don't have children, Carl said, the lie slipping out so smoothly it sounded like truth. He'd practiced it enough times. Sherman studied him for half a beat. Not long enough to be insubordinate. Long enough to be human. Understood, Sherman said finally. I told her there must be some mistake. She insisted she has proof. Photos? Documents? Images flashed in Carl's mind, Melissa's name lighting up his inbox years ago. Subject line, they're here. He'd been in the middle of finalizing an acquisition. Millions of dollars on the line. Board members breathing down his neck. He'd opened the email just long enough to see 2 tiny faces in pink hats, swaddled in hospital blankets, cheeks smushed, eyes closed. He'd seen the caption beneath the photo. Betty and Daisy. They look just like you, don't they? For one terrifying moment. He'd felt something break through, something that had nothing to do with profit, or stock options, or control. He deleted the email before that something could finish forming. Back in his office now, he folded his hands on the desk to keep them from betraying him. And what does she want? He asked Sherman. As if he didn't already know, there was only one reason. A woman like Lisa would walk into his world again after he'd walked out of hers. She refused to say anything more to me, Sherman replied. Said it was between you and your conscience. Of course she did. Lisa had always had a way of going straight for the part of him he pretended didn't exist. Security has her blocked from the building? Carl asked. Yes, sir. I can file a formal no trespass order if you'd like. For a moment, Carl was tempted. How easy it would be to sign another document. Check another box. Put up another wall. He'd been doing it for 9 years, 10, if you counted the months before the twins were born. But something else stopped him. Not conscience. Not yet. Self-protection. Because if he filed something official, if this became legal, documented, traceable, then whatever she'd come to say would no longer be theoretical. It would have a file number. A timestamp. A paper trail. Not yet, Carl said. If she calls again, direct her to my assistant. Tell her my schedule is full until next quarter. It was cruel, in that polite, corporate way, using calendars as weapons. Understood, Sherman said. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. One more thing, sir. She mentioned, a hospital. Carl's grip tightened on the edge of his desk. Did she say why? He asked, his voice so even it bordered on flat. No, Sherman said, just that it was urgent. Life or death, in her words. Life or death. He heard the phrase with a clinical detachment. People use those words for drama all the time. Deals feel life or death. Markets feel life or death. But real life? Real death? He'd made a career out of pretending those things happened to other people. That will be all, Sherman, Carl said. Once the door closed, the silence pressed in. He stared out at the city from the 87th floor, watching the tiny ant-like movements of humans far below. In one of those apartments, maybe, a woman was waking up her children, making toast, packing lunches, wiping jam off small faces. 9 years ago, that could have been his life. He had chosen differently. He returned to his chair, clicking open his email. Hundreds of messages, board concerns, investor questions, invitations to speak at conferences where people would call him visionary and self-made and disciplined. None of them used words like father. He found himself typing Melissa into the search bar before he could stop himself. No results, of course. He'd purged those emails during a digital cleanse years back, the same week he'd sold his old car. The same week he'd had the last box of Lisa's things removed from storage. You can't be haunted by ghosts you've erased. Or so he'd believed. A notification pinged in the corner of his screen, an internal alert from Brown Tech Medical, the division that handled employee health screenings and data. Routine registry ping. Potential donor match. Click to view. His finger hovered over the mouse. 3 weeks ago, an identical alert had appeared. He'd almost ignored it. These things came through all the time. But the system flagged it as exceptionally strong genetic match. He'd clicked out of idle curiosity. He'd seen the last name, Blake. His stomach had turned to stone. He hadn't needed to read the rest. He hadn't needed to see the words pediatric patient, or rare blood disorder, or urgent donor required. He'd simply scrolled to the bottom and checked the box. Decline. No further contact. And just like that, he'd closed the window on whatever emergency had prompted his name to appear. He told himself he didn't owe anyone anything. That she'd made her choices and he'd made his. That biology didn't equal responsibility. Now, in the quiet of his immaculate office, that click echoed louder than any shouted accusation. He shut the alert without opening it, just as he had then. Work. He needed work. Spreadsheets, projections, anything that felt clean, rational, bloodless. At 8:50, he entered the boardroom. 12 people sat around the long table, each with their own portfolio, their own stakes in his success. They straightened when he entered, their faces a mix of respect, fear, and greed. "Let's begin," Carl said. He moved through charts and forecasts with surgical precision. Profits were up. Market share was expanding. Their European play was ahead of schedule. Data privacy regulations posed a potential hurdle, but nothing they couldn't outmaneuver. He was in his element here. Numbers didn't cry. Contracts didn't ask why you left. Profit margins didn't look at you with gray eyes and ask if you ever wanted them. And, with that, he concluded, "We're projecting a 14% increase in Q4. Questions? There were a few. Technical. Predictable. He answered them smoothly. The practiced performer. On a stage he'd built himself. Only once did his gaze flicker to the glass wall outside the boardroom, to the blur of movement on the executive floor. Assistants rushing, phones ringing, lives happening. Somewhere out there, a woman named Lisa was dialing a number again. He forced himself back to the present. When the meeting ended, handshakes were exchanged, compliments offered. "Brilliant strategy as always, Carl. We're lucky to have your leadership. You really have no weaknesses, do you?" He smiled the way he'd been trained to smile in front of cameras, warm, detached, just earnest enough. If they'd looked closer, they might have seen it just the faintest crack at the corner of his mouth when one board member joked about family distractions ruining good CEOs. He didn't laugh. He moved on. Back in his office, Kennedy hovered at the doorway, tablet in hand. "There's something you need to know, sir," she said, her voice strangely tight. He checked his watch. "If this is about scheduling, send it to—" "It's not scheduling," she interrupted, then immediately looked like she regretted interrupting. "Sorry, it's security." He straightened. "What about security?" Kennedy swallowed. "Sherman just called from the lobby," she said. "The woman we've been turning away." She looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time that morning. "She's in the building, Mr. Brown." Carl's hand froze on the armrest. "What do you mean, she's in the building?" he asked. Every word precise, controlled. "Someone at reception must have made a mistake," Kennedy said. "Or she found another way. But Sherman just confirmed. Lisa Blake is on her way up to the 87th floor." For the first time in a very long time, Carl Brown felt something he couldn't quantify on a chart or bury under a quarterly report: panic. The elevator dinged somewhere down the hall. Here's what you need to understand about men like Carl Brown. They spend their whole lives building walls. Emotional ones. Professional ones. Walls made of money and power and carefully controlled narratives, but every wall has a door. And Lisa Blake just found his. If this story is hitting you where it counts, if you're wondering whether Carl will finally face what he's been running from, then you need to stay with us. Like this video so we know you're feeling this as much as we are. Because the confrontation that's about to happen, it's the kind that changes everything. And trust me, you don't want to miss it. And the man who'd spent 9 years burying his heart realized the past he'd abandoned wasn't done with him yet. Lisa Blake hadn't planned to deceive anyone. But when she'd walked into the gleaming lobby of Brown Tech headquarters that morning, marble floors so polished she could see her reflection, abstract sculptures that probably cost more than her yearly salary, she'd known immediately that honesty wouldn't get her past the front desk. "I need to see Carl Brown," she'd said to the receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled hair and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but Mr. Brown doesn't accept walk-ins. If you'd like to submit a formal request through our contact form." "This is urgent," Lisa had pressed, leaning forward. "It's about his daughters." The receptionist's smile had frozen in place. "Mr. Brown doesn't have children." "I think you're mistaken." Lisa had opened her mouth to argue, to scream the truth into this sterile lobby until someone listened, but a voice behind her had stopped her cold. "Excuse me." She'd turned to find a young woman in her mid-20s, glasses perched on her nose, carrying a tablet and an expression that looked almost sympathetic. "Kennedy," her name badge read. "Executive assistant." "I couldn't help overhearing," Kennedy had said quietly, glancing at the receptionist. "Why don't you come with me? I'll see what I can do." The receptionist had started to protest, but Kennedy had already swiped her badge at the security turnstile, holding it open just long enough for Lisa to slip through. They'd walked quickly toward the elevators, Kennedy's heels clicking against marble. "I don't know what your situation is," Kennedy had whispered as the elevator doors closed, "but I saw you yesterday, and this morning. And—" She'd paused, pressing the button for the 87th floor. "I have a little sister. If she needed me, I'd walk through walls." Lisa's throat had tightened. "Thank you." "I didn't do anything," Kennedy had said, staring straight ahead as the numbers climbed. "You were never here." Now, as the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, Lisa's heart hammered so hard she could hear it in her ears. Plush carpets, floor-to-ceiling windows. The kind of silence that came from money and power, insulating itself from the rest of the world. Down the hall, through a wall of glass, she could see them, a dozen people in tailored suits seated around a massive conference table. And at the head of that table, his back to her, stood Carl Brown, older, grayer at the temples, still carrying himself like he owned the air he breathed. Lisa's hands curled into fists. She didn't pause, didn't second-guess. She'd spent 9 years raising his daughters alone, and she wasn't about to wait politely while they died. She walked straight toward the boardroom. An assistant saw her first, eyes widening. "Ma'am, you can't." But Lisa was already pushing open the glass door. 12 heads turned in unison. Carl froze mid-sentence, his hand still raised to point at something on the screen behind him. For a moment, just one breathless, suspended moment, their eyes met across the room. And Lisa saw it. The recognition, the shock, and beneath it all, the guilt he'd been burying for nearly a decade. "Mr. Brown," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "We need to talk." Gasps rippled around the table. A woman in a charcoal blazer leaned toward the man beside her, whispering. Someone reached for their phone. Carl lowered his hand slowly, his expression shifting from shock to something harder, more controlled. "This is a private meeting," he said, his voice cold and clipped. "You need to leave." "No," Lisa replied, stepping further into the room. "You need to listen." A security guard appeared at the doorway behind her, hand already reaching for her arm. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to." "Don't touch her," Carl said sharply. The guard froze. The room went silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Carl straightened, buttoning his suit jacket with deliberate precision, a man buying himself seconds to think. Everyone, he said without taking his eyes off Lisa, take a 15-minute break. Carl, we're in the middle of, one board member began. 15 minutes, Carl repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. They filed out one by one, some curious, some annoyed, all of them throwing glances back at the woman who just walked into their CEO's boardroom like she owned it. When the last person left, Carl gestured toward his office. In here. Lisa followed him through a side door into a corner office that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd never heard of warmth. Glass desk. Leather chairs. Not a single photograph. Not a single piece of anything personal. Just money and power, arranged in tasteful neutrals. Carl closed the door and turned to face her. Arms crossed. How did you get in here? He asked. Does it matter? Lisa shot back. Security protocols matter, yes. She couldn't believe it. Even now, even here, he was hiding behind procedures and walls. Your daughters are dying, Carl, she said, her voice cracking on the last word. That's what matters. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Lisa reached into her bag and pulled out 2 photographs, laying them side by side on his immaculate desk. Betty and Daisy, smiling, alive. Betty, with her arms slung around Daisy's shoulders, both of them covered in paint from an art project. Daisy, holding up a spelling test marked with a gold star. 2 girls with his gray eyes, his stubborn chin, his exact shade of dark hair. Carl stared at the photos like they were evidence in a trial he hadn't expected. They're 9 years old, Lisa said quietly. Betty wants to be a writer. Daisy wants to paint murals on buildings. They both hate broccoli. They share a bedroom because we can't afford a bigger apartment. And 3 days ago, I found out they have aplastic anemia. She watched his face, searching for any crack in the armor. Their bone marrow is failing, she continued, pulling out the medical folder and setting it beside the photos. Without a transplant, they have weeks, maybe less. Carl's hand moved toward the folder, hesitated, then pulled back. We tested everyone, Lisa said, her voice gaining strength. My sister, my cousins, the National Registry. 17 million potential donors, and not a single match. She leaned forward, forcing him to meet her eyes. Except you. Something flickered across his face. Fear, maybe, or the beginning of understanding what she was asking. The doctors say a parent is almost always the strongest match, Lisa pressed. You're their father, Carl. You're the only person who can save them. He turned away, moving to the window, hands shoved deep in his pockets. I saw the registry request, he said finally, his voice low. Lisa went cold. What? 3 weeks ago. A donor match alert came through our medical system. He didn't turn around. I saw the last name Blake. The admission hung in the air like a confession. And you did nothing, Lisa whispered, the words tasting like ash. I didn't know the full situation, Carl said, but even he sounded like he didn't believe it. You didn't want to know, Lisa corrected, her hands trembling now with barely contained rage. You saw their name, and you turned away. Again, he finally faced her, and for a moment, she saw past the CEO, past the billionaire, to the man who'd once held her at 3 a.m. and promised he'd never let her go. That man was buried so deep, she wondered if he even existed anymore. Lisa, he began, and the sound of her name in his mouth after 9 years of silence nearly broke her. Complicated? She laughed, a sharp, broken sound. Complicated is figuring out how to explain to your daughters why they don't have a father. Complicated is working 2 jobs to keep them fed while you build towers with your name on them. This isn't complicated, Carl. This is simple. They need you. For once in their lives, they need you. He pressed his fingers to his temples, a gesture she remembered from late nights when deals went south, when pressure mounted. I need time to think about this, he said. The words hit her like a physical blow. Think about it, she repeated, her voice rising. Carl, they don't have time. Do you understand what I'm telling you? My babies are dying while you stand here in your perfect office, thinking about whether saving them fits into your schedule. That's not what I... Then what? Lisa demanded, stepping closer. What exactly do you need to think about? Whether they're worth the inconvenience? Whether this will affect your precious reputation? Whether... I don't know if I can do this, Carl shouted, the words erupting from somewhere deep and desperate. The silence that followed was deafening. Lisa stared at him. This man who commanded boardrooms and moved markets, and realized with devastating clarity that he was exactly the same terrified boy who'd walked away 9 years ago. He'd just gotten richer. You can't, she said softly, dangerously. Or you won't? Carl's hands dropped to his sides. I don't know. They're your daughters, Lisa said, each word deliberate. They have your eyes. Your smile. Betty laughs exactly like you used to. This surprised little sound. Like she can't believe something's funny. Daisy gets this crease between her eyebrows when she's concentrating, right here. She picked up the photos from his desk, holding them out to him. Look at them, Carl. Really look. And then tell me you need time to think about whether they deserve to live. He took the photos with shaking hands. For a long moment, he just stared at Betty's paint-covered grin, at Daisy's proud grip on her spelling test. His throat worked, his eyes went glassy. But when he finally spoke, his voice was still wrapped in that protective coldness. I'll consider it, he said. Let me review the medical information. Talk to my doctors. I need to understand what's involved. Lisa felt something inside her shatter. She'd walked into this building hoping, praying that somewhere beneath the empire and the ego, the man she'd once loved still existed. That fatherhood, even delayed, might override fear. She'd been wrong. You already had 9 years to consider it, she said quietly, taking the photos back from his hands. Now, let me tell you something about that phrase, I need time to think. It's what people say when they already know the answer but they're hoping the question will go away. When they're choosing comfort over courage. When they're about to walk away again. If you've ever been on the receiving end of that excuse, if you've ever had someone ask for time when what they really meant was no, then you know exactly what Lisa felt in that moment. This is the story of what happens when one person's fear collides with another person's desperation. And if you want to see whether Carl finds his spine or loses his daughters forever, hit that comment button and tell us. Do you think he deserves a second chance? Because your answers matter to us. We read every single one. And share this with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's fighting alone. Someone who knows what it's like to be abandoned by the one person who should have stayed. 9 years, Carl. She repeated, her hand on the doorknob. And they're out of time in weeks. So you think about it. You review your documents. You consult your doctors and your lawyers and whoever else you need to make yourself feel like you're being reasonable. She turned back one last time, and her voice dropped to barely a whisper. But when you're lying in bed tonight in this empty tower you built, remember that somewhere in a hospital bed, your daughters are lying awake wondering why their bodies are failing them. And the only person who can stop it is too busy thinking. She opened the door. Lisa, he started. But she was already walking away, past the staring assistants, past the security guard who tried to stop her, toward the elevator that would take her back down to earth, where real people faced real consequences. Behind her, through the glass wall of his office, Carl Brown stood, frozen, billionaire, CEO, empire builder, and for the first time in 9 years, utterly powerless. The elevator doors closed on Lisa's face, and Carl was left alone with 2 photographs he couldn't stop staring at, and a choice he'd already made once before. Only this time, the consequences wore his face and carried his name. And this time, saying no meant watching them die. The photographs sat on Carl's desk like accusations. He'd tried putting them in the drawer. Out of sight. Back to business. But 20 minutes later, his hand had reached for the handle without conscious thought. And there they were again, Betty and Daisy. Frozen in a moment of joy he had no right to witness. The sun had set hours ago. The office towers across the street glowed with squares of light, other people working late. Or perhaps just leaving their lights on to fool themselves into believing they weren't alone. Carl was alone. Sherman had knocked twice, asking if he needed anything. Carl had sent him home. Kennedy had emailed the rescheduled meetings. He'd ignored them all. Now it was just him and the city and the weight of Lisa's final words echoing in the silence. You already had 9 years. His hand moved to his desk drawer, not the one with the photos, but the one below it, the locked one. He pulled the key from his wallet and turned it with a click that felt too loud. Inside, a single flash drive. He'd told himself he kept it for security reasons, that maintaining encrypted backups of sensitive communications was just good practice. But that was a lie, and he'd always known it. He plugged it into his computer. The folder was labeled Archive Personal 2016. Innocuous, forgettable. He opened it. There, buried beneath meeting notes and contract drafts, was the email he'd sworn he'd deleted. From melissa.carter@gmail.com. Subject: They're here. Date: the 14th of January 2017. His cursor hovered over it. He'd opened it once. 3 years after walking away. Just once. Long enough to see the attachment, 2 tiny faces, pink hospital caps, eyes closed, impossibly small. He'd read the caption: Betty and Daisy Blake, born January 12, 7:03 and 7:09 a.m. Both healthy, both perfect. They look just like you, don't they? And beneath that, Melissa had added, Lisa's doing amazing. She won't admit it, but I think she wishes you were here. Carl had closed the email after 30 seconds. He'd thrown himself into a merger that week. Worked until 2 a.m. for 6 days straight. Told himself that if he just kept moving, kept building, the hollowness would fill itself. It never had. Now, sitting in his office with the city holding its breath outside, Carl clicked on the attachment. The photo loaded. 2 babies, swaddled, perfect. And even then, even at hours old, he could see it. The shape of Betty's nose, Daisy's tiny furrowed brow, his daughter's, not hypothetical, not abstract, his. The donor request notification sat in his deleted folder, time-stamped 3 weeks earlier. He navigated to it with the grim determination of someone forcing themselves to look at a wound they'd been ignoring. Registry match alert. Patient: Blake, Betty and Blake, Daisy, age 9. Condition: aplastic anemia, critical. Match strength: 98.7%. Exceptional. Action required. Confirm willingness to proceed with donor evaluation. He'd seen Blake, and his stomach had dropped. He'd seen age 9, and his hands had started shaking. He'd scrolled to the bottom without reading the medical details, without looking at the prognosis, without letting himself think about what critical meant for 2 little girls who carried his DNA. And he'd clicked the box marked, Decline, Do Not Contact. He'd told himself it was a mistake, that it couldn't be them, that there were probably hundreds of Blakes in the registry. But he'd known, deep down, in the part of himself he'd spent 9 years burying, he'd known exactly who those patients were. And he'd said no anyway. Carl pushed back from his desk, his breath coming faster now. The walls of his office, glass and steel and achievement, felt like they were closing in. He grabbed his coat and keys. Where are you going? His reflection seemed to ask from the dark window. He didn't answer. Street Catherine's pediatric hospital sat on the east side of the city, tucked between residential blocks where lights glowed warm in kitchen windows and families gathered around dinner tables. Carl parked 3 blocks away. He couldn't explain why. Some instinct for self-preservation, maybe, or the certainty that if anyone saw him here, if this became documented or witnessed, he'd have to admit what he was doing. And he wasn't ready to admit anything yet. The hospital's main entrance was quiet at 9 p.m., just a security guard at the desk and a few exhausted-looking visitors signing out for the night. Carl pulled his collar up and walked past them without making eye contact. He'd made a single phone call on the drive over to a doctor on Brown Tech's medical board who owed him a favor. I need to know what room the Blake twins are in. Quietly. Mr. Brown? I'm not sure I can. Please, Carl had said, and the word had tasted foreign in his mouth. Room 447. 4th floor. Pediatric Oncology Wing. The elevator ride felt like descending into water, pressure building with each floor. By the time the doors opened, his heart was hammering against his ribs. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and exhaustion. Nurses moved with the practiced efficiency of people who'd learned not to feel too much. A child's laugh echoed from somewhere, bright and jarring against the institutional quiet. Room 447 was at the end of the hall, door partially open, soft light spilling out. Carl stopped 10 feet away. He could hear voices. Lisa's first low, soothing. The tone of a mother who'd spent 9 years turning fear into comfort. "It's okay, baby. The medicine makes you tired. That's all. That's normal." Then a smaller voice, younger, scared. "But what if it doesn't work, Mommy?" Carl's breath caught. "It's going to work," Lisa said with a certainty that sounded like faith wrapped around terror. "We're going to find a donor. And you're going to get better. And then we're going to go home, and you're going to paint that mural you've been planning. Promise? Promise." Carl moved closer, staying in the shadows, until he could see through the gap in the door. The room was small, 2 beds, monitors beeping softly, IV poles, get-well cards taped to the walls, dozens of them, colorful and hopeful and heartbreaking. In the bed closest to the window, Daisy, small for 9, face pale against the pillow, dark hair fanned out like spilled ink, an oxygen monitor clipped to her finger. She held a stuffed rabbit, worn and loved. In the bed beside her, Betty, holding her sister's hand across the gap between them, whispering something Carl couldn't hear. And standing between them, Lisa, exhausted, running on fumes and hope, still wearing the same clothes from this afternoon, her hair pulled back, shadows under her eyes that spoke of too many nights spent in chairs like the one folded in the corner. She was adjusting Daisy's blanket when Betty spoke again. "Mommy, did you find him?" Lisa's hands stilled. "Find who, sweetheart?" "The donor," Betty said. "Did you find the person who can help us?" Carl watched Lisa's face crumple for just a second, just one unguarded moment of grief, before she rebuilt it into something steady. "I'm working on it," she said softly. "What if they say no?" Daisy asked, her voice so small it barely carried. "They won't," Lisa said firmly. "Nobody could say no to you too." But Carl heard what she didn't say. He already did. Betty shifted, wincing slightly, and reached for Daisy's hand with more intention. "Don't be scared, Daisy," she whispered. And Carl could hear the effort it took for her to sound brave. "Mommy's going to fix everything. She always does. What if she can't this time?" Daisy's voice broke. "She will," Betty insisted, squeezing her sister's hand tighter. "And if she can't, then we'll be okay together. Promise, promise," Daisy echoed. Carl gripped the doorframe to keep himself upright. These weren't abstractions. They weren't numbers in a medical file or complications in his carefully ordered life. They were real. Betty had Lisa's fierce loyalty. Daisy had her gentle fear. Both of them had his eyes, that exact shade of gray he saw every morning in the mirror. They had his blood, his genetics, his face, and they were dying. The word finally landed with its full weight. Dying. While he sat in boardrooms and signed contracts and pretended he'd made the right choice 9 years ago, Lisa leaned down and kissed each girl's forehead. "Get some sleep, both of you. I'll be right here." "You promise you won't leave?" Daisy asked. "Never," Lisa whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." Carl watched her settle into the chair between their beds, one hand reaching out to touch each girl, constant contact, constant reassurance. She was everything. And he had walked away from all of it because he was scared and ambitious and too young to understand what he was giving up. No, not giving up. Abandoning. The difference felt important now. A nurse appeared at the end of the hallway, and Carl stepped back quickly, heart pounding. He couldn't be seen, couldn't explain, couldn't face the questions that would come if anyone discovered him here. He backed away, one step, then another, until he was around the corner, pressed against the wall, breathing hard. From the room, he heard Daisy's voice, drowsy now from medication. "Mommy, do you think our daddy loves us?" Carl stopped breathing. "Of course he does, baby," Lisa said, and her voice carried the weight of a lie told for kindness. Sometimes, people just don't know how to show it. But he's never even met us, Betty said, clearer-minded than her sister. How can he love us if he doesn't know us? Silence. Then, some people are just scared, Lisa finally said. And fear makes people do things they regret. Do you think he regrets us? Betty asked. Carl heard Lisa's sharp inhale, heard the moment she had to steady herself. No, sweetheart, never. You two are the best thing that ever happened. Anyone who can't see that is just lost. Can lost people find their way back? Daisy murmured, half asleep now. Sometimes, Lisa whispered. If they want to. Carl pushed off the wall and walked fast, then faster, then nearly running toward the elevator. He made it outside, before the first sob broke through. Made it to his car before his legs gave out, and he leaned against the driver's side door, hands shaking so violently he couldn't get the keys in the lock. The image of Betty holding Daisy's hand was seared into his brain. Don't be scared. Mommy's going to fix everything. But Lisa couldn't fix this. Only he could, and he'd already said no once. Carl finally got the door open and collapsed into the driver's seat, his breath coming in ragged gasps. For 9 years, he'd convinced himself that walking away had been the hard choice, the responsible choice, the choice that protected everyone involved. Tonight, he'd seen the truth. It had been the easy choice, the selfish one, the one that let him sleep at night, while 2 little girls grew up wondering why their father didn't want them. And now those girls, his girls, were running out of time while he hid behind lawyers and logic and fear. From somewhere in his memory, Daisy's voice echoed, "Do you think our daddy loves us?" Carl pressed his forehead against the steering wheel. "Yes," he whispered to the empty car. To the girls who couldn't hear him, to the man he should have been 9 years ago. God, yes. I didn't know how. But fear wasn't an excuse anymore. Not when it had a body count. Not when it wore his daughters' faces. Carl pulled out his phone with trembling hands and scrolled to Sherman's number. One text. Schedule my bone marrow testing. First thing tomorrow. No delays. He sat in his car outside the hospital for another hour, watching the windows of the 4th floor, trying to memorize which one held his daughters, trying to figure out how to become the man they deserved, even if he was 9 years too late. You know what breaks a person? Not the big dramatic moments. Not the grand gestures or the shouted confrontations. It's the quiet ones, the whispered questions from a 9-year-old in a hospital bed asking if her daddy loves her. The sister holding her twin's hand promising everything will be okay when she's just as terrified. That's what breaks you. That's what changes you. If this story is reaching into your chest and squeezing, if you're thinking about the people in your life who showed up or the ones who didn't, then we need you to do something. Subscribe. Because this journey isn't over. Carl's about to face the hardest test of his life, and you're going to want to be here when he does. Click that button. Join us. Because some stories demand witnesses. The call came at 6:47 a.m. Lisa was already awake. She hadn't really slept. Just existed in that gray space between consciousness and exhaustion. Her body folded into the hospital chair between Betty and Daisy's beds. When her phone buzzed, she grabbed it before the second ring, stepping into the hallway so she wouldn't wake the girls. "Miss Blake?" Dr. Hartsfield's voice carried something she hadn't heard before. Hope, maybe, or disbelief. "Carl Brown's office just contacted us. He's agreed to testing." Lisa's knees buckled. She caught herself against the wall, hand pressed to her mouth. "When?" she managed. "This morning, 9 a.m. He's coming here. Here. To the hospital. To the same building where his daughters lay dying. Miss Blake, are you there?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes. Thank you." She ended the call and slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold linoleum floor. And for the first time in 3 weeks, she let herself cry, not the silent, strangled sobs she'd been choking back at night, but full, gasping relief. He'd said yes. It didn't erase 9 years of absence. Didn't forgive the abandonment or the denial or the request he'd declined 3 weeks ago. But it meant her daughters might live. And right now, that was everything. Carl arrived at Street Catherine's at 8:53 a.m. in a black town car with tinted windows. Sherman walked 2 steps ahead of him, scanning the lobby like he expected an ambush. Behind them, a young phlebotomist from Brown Tech's private medical team carried a leather case of equipment. Mr. Brown, the hospital administrator, appeared immediately, hand extended, smile wide and practiced. "We're honored to have you here. If you'll follow me, we've prepared a private suite for the testing." "That won't be necessary," Carl said quietly. "Use your standard procedures." "Standard room." The administrator blinked. "Sir, with all due respect, we can offer you more comfortable." "Standard room," Carl repeated, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. He wasn't here for comfort. By 9:15, word had spread through the hospital like wildfire. "Carl Brown is here. The billionaire. The CEO. The father." Nurses whispered in break rooms. Orderlies slowed near the 4th-floor wing. A resident pulled out her phone, fingers hovering over the camera app before thinking better of it. In room 447, Lisa was helping Daisy with breakfast applesauce, the only thing she could keep down lately, when Betty looked up from her book. "Mommy, why is everyone walking past our room?" Lisa glanced at the doorway. Betty was right. Staff kept finding reasons to pass by, stealing glances through the window. Before she could answer, Dr. Hartsfield appeared, knocking softly. "Miss Blake, may I speak with you for a moment?" Lisa followed him into the hallway, pulling the door partially closed. "Mr. Brown is here," the doctor said. "He's in exam room 3, undergoing the preliminary testing now." "But—" he hesitated. "There's something you should know. His identity is causing quite a stir. I've already had to speak to 3 staff members about discretion." Lisa's stomach tightened. "Meaning?" "Meaning I can't guarantee this stays quiet. Not with who he is." She closed her eyes. "Of course, because nothing involving Carl Brown happened quietly." "How long until we know if he's a match?" she asked. "Initial results by this afternoon. Full compatibility screening within 48 hours. 48 hours. 2 more days of not knowing if her daughter's father would save them or if his genetics would fail them one final time. Does he want to see them?" Lisa heard herself ask. Dr. Hartsfield's expression softened. He asked about them, their condition, their prognosis, but he didn't ask to meet them. Not yet. Not yet. Lisa wasn't sure if that was cowardice or consideration. By noon, the story had leaked. Sanders Media, a gossip blog that specialized in tech industry drama, posted first. Breaking. Billionaire Carl Brown at pediatric hospital. Sources confirm. Secret twin daughters. The article was thin on facts and heavy on speculation, but it included a photo someone had snapped through the hospital's front windows. Carl's silhouette, unmistakable even in profile. Within an hour, it had been picked up by larger outlets. Tech CEO's hidden family crisis. Carl Brown, the daughters he never acknowledged. Billionaire's secret twins fighting for their lives. And the most damaging, he denied them once. Will he deny them again? That headline came with a photo not of Carl, but of Lisa, walking into Brown Tech headquarters 2 days earlier, desperation written across her face. Someone had been recording. Lisa's phone started ringing. Reporters. Distant relatives she hadn't spoken to in years. An old college friend, asking if it was true. She turned it off and threw it in her bag. At 2:30 p.m., there was a knock on the door of room 447. Sherman stood in the hallway, looking uncomfortable in a way that suggested he'd rather be defusing bombs than delivering messages. "Miss Blake?" "Mr. Brown would like to speak with you. Privately." Lisa glanced at the twins, both napping. Finally, after a difficult morning, she followed Sherman to a small conference room, 3 doors down. Carl stood by the window, hands in his pockets, staring out at the parking lot. He turned when she entered. He looked tired, human. The armor he'd worn in his office had cracked somewhere between yesterday and now. "The tests are done," he said without preamble. Lisa nodded, staying near the door, maintaining distance. "I also wanted to." Carl paused, searching for words that didn't come easily. I've arranged for the hospital to have whatever resources they need. I can have specialists flown in from anywhere, better equipment, private rooms, whatever will help. And there it was, the thing he knew how to do. Throw money at problems until they felt manageable. We don't need private rooms, Lisa said quietly. The girls would be more comfortable. They're comfortable enough. She cut him off. What they need is bone marrow, not luxury. Carl's jaw tightened. I'm trying to help. Then show up, Lisa said. Her voice harder now. Not with your checkbook. Not with your connections. With yourself. I'm here, aren't I? You're in a conference room 3 doors away from your daughters, Lisa said. That's not the same as being here. Silence stretched between them like a canyon. I don't know how to do this, Carl admitted finally, and the vulnerability in his voice would have moved her yesterday. Today, it just exhausted her. Neither did I, Lisa said. 9 years ago, when you walked away, I didn't know how to be a single mother. How to explain to 2 little girls why their father didn't want them. How to work 2 jobs and still make it to every school play, every doctor's appointment, every nightmare at 3 a.m. She stepped closer. But I learned, because I didn't have a choice, because they needed me. Lisa, they need you now, she said. Not your money. Not your empire. You. And if you can't figure out how to give them that, then the marrow doesn't matter, because they'll survive with a father who's still absent, just with a pulse. Before Carl could respond, Sherman appeared in the doorway. Sir? The girls are awake. They're asking questions about why there are cameras outside. Lisa's blood ran cold. Cameras? 3 news vans in the parking lot, Sherman confirmed. Hospital security is handling it, but... Carl's expression darkened. Get rid of them. We can't force them off public property. Then buy the property, Carl snapped. I don't care. Just get them away from here. Lisa pushed past both men, heading back toward room 447. Betty and Daisy were sitting up in their beds, Daisy clutching her stuffed rabbit, Betty staring at the window where she could just see the edge of a news van. Mommy, why are there cameras? Daisy asked, her voice small and scared. Lisa knelt beside her bed. It's nothing, baby. Just some confusion. It's going to be fine. Are they here because of us? Betty asked. She was always the perceptive one, reading situations with an accuracy that sometimes broke Lisa's heart. No, sweetheart. They're here because of me. Lisa turned. Carl stood in the doorway. The twins' eyes went wide. For a moment, nobody moved. The machines beeped. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere down the hall, a child laughed. And Carl Brown looked at his daughters, truly looked at them, for the first time in their lives. Who are you? Daisy whispered. Carl's throat worked. His hands, usually so steady in boardrooms and negotiations, trembled at his sides. Lisa stood, instinctively positioning herself between him and the girls. But Betty spoke before she could. You're him, aren't you? Betty said, her voice clear despite the oxygen tube in her nose. You're our father. The word father seemed to hit Carl like a physical blow. Yes, he managed. I am. Daisy looked between Betty and Carl, processing. Why didn't you come before? The question every 9-year-old deserved to ask. The question Carl had no good answer for. He stepped further into the room, moving slowly, like approaching something wild and precious. I made a mistake. A big one. And I'm sorry. You're sorry? Betty's voice carried an edge that sounded eerily like Lisa's. We've been alive for 9 years and you're sorry? Betty, Lisa started, but Carl shook his head. No, she's right. He looked at Betty directly. I should have been there, from the beginning. And I wasn't. And that's on me. Not your mother. Not you. Me. Betty crossed her arms, unimpressed. Because you're sick, Carl said simply. And I can help. With money? Betty challenged. She'd heard the whispers, seen the news vans, connected the dots faster than anyone gave her credit for. With bone marrow, Carl corrected. I'm being tested to see if I'm a match for you and your sister. Daisy's grip on her rabbit loosened slightly. You're going to save us? I'm going to try, Carl said, and Lisa heard the promise beneath the words. If I can, I will. Daisy studied him with those gray eyes, his eyes, and some of the fear leaked out of her expression. Okay, she whispered. But Betty wasn't ready to forgive. Where have you been all this time? Building things that don't matter, Carl said quietly. Missing things that do. Before anyone could respond, Dr. Hartsfield appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand, expression unreadable. Mr. Brown, Miss Blake, I need to speak with you both. Lisa's heart stopped. The results? Not over the phone, the doctor said carefully. In my office, please. Carl and Lisa exchanged a glance, the first moment of shared fear they'd had in 9 years. We'll be right back, Lisa told the twins, kissing each of their foreheads. As they followed Dr. Hartsfield down the hallway, Daisy's small voice carried after them. Mommy? Is he really going to save us? Lisa didn't answer, because she didn't know. And in 48 hours, they'd find out if Carl Brown's genetics would finally give his daughters what his presence never had. A chance to live. Dr. Hartsfield's office felt even smaller the second time. No windows, air that never quite moved. A desk half buried in paperwork and a single lamp casting everything in tired yellow. Lisa sat on the edge of the chair, fingers twisted together so tightly they'd gone numb. Carl stood, because sitting felt too much like accepting whatever was about to happen. The doctor looked from one to the other, then down at his tablet. The full results are back, he said. Mr. Brown, you are the strongest possible match. Lisa's breath left her in a sound that was almost a sob and almost a prayer. How strong, she whispered. 10 out of 10 HLA markers. That's as close to perfect as we can hope for. Your bone marrow is the best chance they have. Lisa pressed her palms over her face for a second, shoulders shaking once before she forced herself to steady. Carl's mind snagged on the word perfect. He wasn't a perfect anything. Not a perfect man or partner, and certainly not a perfect father. But his body, his blood, had something in it that could save them. What happens now? He asked, voice low. We begin preparation, Dr. Hartsfield said. We'll schedule your donor workup, and we'll start the girls on conditioning therapy, chemo, anti-rejection meds. Their immune systems will be wiped out to receive your marrow. He paused. This is not an easy road. There will be pain, side effects, risks. For them, and for you. Lisa nodded, absorbing every word, the way only a mother holding on to hope by the thinnest thread can. How soon? She asked. We don't have time to waste, the doctor replied. We start tomorrow. Lisa swallowed hard and stood. Thank you, she said. I'll get them ready. She moved toward the door, then stopped and turned to Carl. Her eyes were red, but there was steel under the exhaustion. If you change your mind now, she said quietly, tell me today. Not when they're already hooked up. Not when they're looking at you like you're their miracle. I'm not changing my mind, Carl said. We'll see, she replied, and walked out. In the hallway, Lisa leaned against the wall, letting herself feel it, for just a heartbeat relief, gratitude, terror, all tangled together. Then she pushed off and headed for room 447. She didn't have the luxury of falling apart, not yet. Inside, Betty was sitting up, pretending to read. Daisy was coloring a half-finished rainbow. Lisa forced a smile. Mommy? Daisy asked, eyes wide. Did they find him? The person who matches us? Lisa's throat tightened, but she nodded. They did, she said. They found the best match possible. Who is it? Betty demanded. Lisa glanced at the doorway. Carl stood there, just outside, watching. He looked stripped. Less CEO, more man. It's him, Lisa said softly. Your father. Betty's gaze swung to Carl, sharp and assessing. Daisy clutched her crayon a little tighter. Does that mean we're going to live? Daisy whispered. It means we're going to fight with everything we have, Lisa answered. And he's finally going to fight with us. Preparation began the next morning. Consent forms. Explanations. A flurry of nurses and specialists coming in and out, each with their own piece of the puzzle. For the girls, chemotherapy, to wipe out their diseased marrow. Medications to prevent rejection. Endless, vital checks. For Carl, blood tests, heart scans, physical evaluations. Long conversations with a transplant coordinator about the procedure and recovery. You may experience significant pain in your lower back and hips, the coordinator explained. Fatigue, possible complications. You'll need someone to help you at home for a few days afterward. Carl thought of the empty penthouse with its cold marble and pristine surfaces. I'll figure it out, he said. That's not figuring it out, Lisa said later, catching him alone near the coffee machine. That's you doing what you always do, assuming you can power through this on your own. He looked tired, grayer, less invincible. They're the ones doing the hard part, he replied. They're going to have chemicals burning through their veins. I can handle some pain. This isn't a competition, she said. You're not trying to win most self-sacrificing parent on your first week. He almost smiled at that. Almost. The first round of chemo hit the girls harder than any of them expected. By the end of day 1, Daisy was pale and nauseous, shivering under layers of blankets. Betty insisted she felt fine, right up until she nearly collapsed on the way to the bathroom. Lisa ran triage between their beds, a hand on one forehead, then the other. She learned to read the numbers on the monitors like another language. Carl stayed. He learned too how to hold the basin when Daisy retched, how to distract Betty with card games and badly told jokes, how to listen when they were too exhausted to talk, but too scared to sleep. One afternoon, when the meds had finally let them drift off, Lisa stepped into the hallway and found him sitting on the floor outside the room, his back against the wall, head tipped back, eyes closed. You should rest, she said. So should you, he answered, without opening his eyes. I've had 9 years of practice, she replied. He cracked one eye open. Is there a manual? Sure, she said. Step 1, show up. Step 2, keep showing up. Step 3, when you feel like running, go sit in the stairwell and have a silent breakdown. Then, come back. He huffed a breath that might have been a laugh. How many times have you done that? He asked. More than I can count. That night, after another brutal chemo session, Daisy clung to Carl's hand as the nurse adjusted her IV. Are you scared? She asked him. He hesitated. Yes. You don't look scared. I've had a lot of practice pretending. She thought about that, her brow furrowing in the way that mirrored his exactly. I'm scared, she confessed. Betty pretends she's not. But I know she is too. What do you talk about? He asked. If the medicine doesn't work, she whispered. If the marrow doesn't work. If we don't get to go home. Carl felt something in his chest twist. I won't let that happen, he said, then caught himself. He wasn't God. He wasn't medicine. He was just a man who'd already failed them once. I can't promise you the outcome, he corrected softly. No one can. But I can promise you this. I will do everything in my power to give you the best chance. And I will not leave you again. Whatever happens. Daisy studied him with those gray eyes that saw straight through people. You mean it this time? She asked. He nodded. I do. Later that week, after another long day of monitoring and meds, Lisa and Carl found themselves alone in the family lounge again. The vending machine hummed. The TV played silently in the corner. 2 forgotten coffee cups sat on the table between them. You walked away once, Lisa said quietly, staring at her hands. They can't survive you walking away again. I know, he replied. I'm here now. I won't fail them this time. She looked up, and the rawness in her eyes was almost unbearable. You say that like it's simple, she said. Like it's just a matter of deciding. You decided to leave once too? That was simple for you. It wasn't. It was, she cut in. You made a choice. You looked at your career, your image, your board, and you chose them. Over me. Over 2 babies who didn't ask to be here. I was scared, he said, and even to his own ears, it sounded thin. So was I, she shot back. Difference is, I stayed. He had no argument. No justification that didn't sound ugly when spoken out loud. I can't undo any of that, he said finally. If I could go back? You can't, she said. All you can do is decide who you're going to be from this moment forward. She leaned in, her voice low and fierce. And hear me clearly, Carl. They are hanging everything on you now. On this procedure. On this promise. If you pull away emotionally, physically, in any way after this, you won't just break their hearts, you will break them, and I will never let you near them again. He held her gaze. I deserve that warning, he said. And I'm taking it seriously. I won't run. I've heard that before, she whispered. Not from this version of me, he replied. You may not believe it yet. But I am not the same man who walked out of that penthouse. Her eyes searched his face, looking for the old cracks, the escape routes, the places he might slip through. I believe you want to be different, she said. I don't know yet, if you know how. Then I'll learn, he answered. You did. She looked away, and for a moment he saw the woman she'd been before, all of this hopeful, softer around the edges. The woman who'd once believed in him. I loved you, she said quietly. So much, it scared me. And you turned me into someone who had to learn how to live without you. His chest ached. I know, he said. I'm so sorry. You saying sorry now doesn't fix the nights I sat alone at 3 a.m. with 2 screaming babies, she replied. But it might matter for what comes next. 2 nights later, Daisy woke up from a bad dream, crying so hard her chest heaved. Mommy, don't go, she sobbed, clutching at Lisa's shirt. I'm right here, Lisa soothed. I'm not going anywhere. Mommy, Daisy hiccuped. Why didn't Daddy come before? Didn't he? Didn't he want us? The room went very still. Betty turned her head toward them, eyes open in the dim light, listening. Lisa opened her mouth, then closed it. She'd practiced 1,000 watered-down answers over the years. He was busy. He lives far away. Adults are complicated. None of them fit anymore. Carl was sitting in the chair between the beds. He heard every word. He felt the question like a blade. Didn't you want us? Lisa looked at him over Daisy's head, eyes shining with tears and something like challenge. This was his mess. His answer to give. He moved slowly, like he was approaching a wild animal that might bolt. Can I answer that? He asked Daisy gently. She sniffled and turned her face toward him, still clinging to Lisa. Okay. Carl swallowed. I did want you, he said. From the moment I knew you existed. But I was selfish. And scared. I thought if I ignored it, if I pretended it wasn't real, I could keep my life the way it was. Without us, Betty said quietly. Yes, he admitted. Without you, and that was the worst mistake I've ever made. Then why didn't you fix it? Daisy asked. You're a grown-up. Grown-ups can fix things. Sometimes grown-ups are cowards, he said. Sometimes we double down on bad choices because we don't want to admit we were wrong. I told myself too much time had passed, that you'd be better off without me, that if I showed up, I'd just cause more pain. You did, Betty said. But also, you helped. He blinked. You gave us your marrow, she continued. You came to the hospital. You stayed. That helped. Do you still not want us? Daisy whispered. Carl's heart broke cleanly. I want you more than anything in this world, he said, voice shaking. If I could trade places with you, I would. In a second. I can't change that I left. But I can promise you, I am here now, and I'm not going away again. Daisy studied him, then slowly held out a hand. Okay, she said. But you can't break this promise. I'm tired of being brave. He took her hand carefully, as if it were made of glass. I won't, he said. Not ever again. If you're still watching this, it probably means this story has touched something raw in you. Maybe you've been the one who stayed when someone else left. Maybe you've been the one who ran and had to live with it. Either way, you know how heavy these conversations are. How much courage it takes for a child to ask, "Didn't you want me?" and for an adult to finally stop lying. If you want to see whether Carl's actions finally match his words, if you're invested in whether these girls get the father they deserve, make sure you're subscribed And tap like so this reaches more people who need stories like this. The next chapter isn't just medical, it's emotional. The procedure is coming, and with it, the breaking point. Stay with this family. Their hardest day is up next, and you won't want to miss it. Carl sat there long after the girls fell back asleep, their small hands tangled in his. Lisa watched him, something in her expression softer now. Not healed, not whole, but no longer closed. For the first time, it felt less like they were on opposite sides of a wound, and more like they were standing together, on the edge of something that might, one day, look like a future. The morning of the procedure, the hospital felt different, quieter, tighter, like the building itself was holding its breath. Carl lay on the pre-op bed, paper gown rustling every time he shifted. An IV line snaked from his arm to a clear bag overhead. Machines hummed softly, indifferent to what this meant for him. For the girls, Dr. Gerald, the anesthesiologist, checked his chart one last time. "We'll put you under general anesthesia," he explained. "We'll extract marrow from the back of your pelvis. You won't feel anything during the procedure, but you should expect soreness and fatigue afterward." Carl nodded. "As long as they get what they need, Doctor." Gerald's expression softened. "They will?" When the doctor stepped out, Lisa slipped in. She shouldn't have had the energy to be anywhere but her daughter's room. But here she was, eyes tired, hair pulled back, hoodie zipped halfway over a faded t-shirt that had probably seen more night shifts than sleep. "You don't have to be here," Carl said quietly. "Neither do you," she replied. "But here we are." She moved closer to the bed. "They took the girls down about 20 minutes ago," she said. "They're getting ready for transfusion." Betty pretended she wasn't scared. Daisy didn't bother pretending. Carl swallowed. "Did they ask about me?" "Of course," Lisa said. "Betty wanted to know if you were scared." "What did you tell her?" "That brave people are always scared. They just do the thing anyway." He almost smiled. "Sounds like something you'd say." "It is." A nurse came in to check the monitors, then left them alone again. There was one thing left between them, heavy, obvious, waiting. "Lisa," Carl said, voice rough, "if something goes wrong." "Don't," she cut in sharply. "Don't you dare." "I need to say it," he insisted. "If something goes wrong, if they can't stop the bleeding, or I react badly to the anesthesia, promise me you won't tell them." I hesitated. "Don't let their last memory be that I almost said no." Lisa's face crumpled for a second before she forced it back under control. "Nothing is going to go wrong," she said, like a command. "You are going to go in there. They are going to take what they need, and you are going to wake up. And then you are going to sit in that chair between their beds and complain about how much it hurts." He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "And then," she added, softer now, "you are going to spend the rest of your life making sure they never again have to wonder whether you want them." Emotion tightened his throat. "I will," he said. "If I get the chance, I will." She reached for his hand, then hesitant at first, then firmly. "I need you to understand something," she said. "This isn't just about the marrow. This is about who you're choosing to be from this day forward. Today, you're choosing to give, to stay, to face pain you could have avoided. That matters, Carl, to them, to me." He looked at her, at the woman he'd loved, failed, and somehow been allowed to stand beside again. "I am so sorry," he whispered. "For every night you did this alone. For every time they asked about me and you had to protect them from the truth. For walking away when all you needed was for me to stay." Tears filled her eyes. "I know," she said. "I know you're sorry. And I need you to hear something too." She took a shaky breath. "I loved you," she admitted. "Deeper than I should have. Deeper than was safe. You walking away didn't just break my heart. It rewired my entire life. I learned how to live without you because I had to. I don't know how to rewrite that overnight." "I'm not asking you to," he said. "I'm just asking for a chance to show you I'm not that man anymore." "Then, wake up," she replied simply. "That's step one." Dr. Gerald returned, flanked by two nurses. "Time to go," he said gently. Lisa squeezed Carl's hand once more, then stepped back. "I'll be here when you wake up," she said. "I thought you'd want to be with them," he replied. "I will be," she said. "I'll be between rooms, just like always." Carl nodded. Tell them yourself," she cut in. Later, the anesthesiologist adjusted the IV, and the world started to soften at the edges. "Count backward from 10, he instructed. 10, Carl murmured, eyes on Lisa. 9, 8. Her face blurred. 7. Darkness folded in. The procedure took almost 3 hours. Lisa stood in the hallway between two worlds, surgical wing one way, transplant room, the other, heart anchored in both. In one room, they were extracting marrow from the man who had finally decided to be a father. In the other, they were preparing 2 little girls whose bodies were too weak to keep going on their own. She bounced between them, checking on the girls as nurses placed central lines and hung bags of clear fluid, then returning to the family consult area where the OR board displayed cryptic updates. She prayed harder than she ever had in her life, not to erase the past, but to preserve the future. Finally, Dr. Gerald emerged from the OR, pulling off his cap. "It went well," he said. "We obtained excellent marrow volume. No complications." Lisa's knees nearly gave out. "And him?" she asked. "Is he?" "In recovery," the doctor assured her. "Still under. Vitals stable. He'll be sore when he wakes. But he did his part. He did his part." Nurses whisked labeled bags of rich, red marrow down the hall, past Lisa, into the transplant unit where Betty and Daisy waited. The transfusion room was colder than their usual hospital room. More machines, more wires, more people moving with a careful urgency that made Lisa's skin prickle. Betty lay on one bed, Daisy on the other, both small against the expanse of white sheets. "This is it?" Betty asked, voice wobbly despite her attempt at bravado. "This is the part where I get his cells?" "Yes," Dr. Hartsfield said, smiling gently. "We're introducing your new bone marrow today. It's like planting seeds in a garden that wasn't growing right. We're giving it everything it needs to start over." "Will it hurt?" Daisy whispered. "You might feel tired, maybe a little strange. But we'll be right here watching you," the doctor said. "You won't be alone." Lisa stood between their beds, one hand on Betty's thin shoulder, the other wrapped around Daisy's fingers. "Remember what we talked about?" she asked softly. "Every drop is a chance. Every minute you stay here, letting your body do its work, is you fighting. That's all you have to do. Just stay." The nurses connected the lines, checked the labels, and began. Carl's marrow began to drip, drop by measured drop, into the veins of his daughters, into their future. Carl woke up to pain, a deep, grinding ache in his lower back and hips, as if someone had scooped out his bones and replaced them with fire. He groaned, and a nurse appeared at his side. "Welcome back," she said softly. "Pain level? 8, he rasped. "We can help with that." While she adjusted his meds, his eyes darted around. "Time?" he asked. "About 2 hours since we finished," she replied. "They're with your daughters now." He tried to sit up and nearly blacked out. "Easy," the nurse said quickly. "You just had a major procedure. You need to lie still." "My daughters," he insisted, grabbing the side rail. I need to see." "You can't go to them yet," she said gently. "Infection risk, and you're still unsteady. Let the pain meds kick in. We'll update you." He knew she was right. It didn't stop the panic. In the transplant room, the first half hour passed quietly. Betty drifted in and out of sleep, murmuring occasionally. Daisy watched the monitor with glassy eyes, tracking the numbers like she understood what they meant. "This is Daddy's?" she asked, glancing at the bag. "Yes," Lisa said. "His marrow, his cells." "So we're made of him now?" Daisy whispered. "You always were," Lisa replied. "Now he's just making it obvious." Daisy managed a tiny smile. Then, 40 minutes in, the monitor above her bed beeped. Just once. Then again. "BP dropping," a nurse said sharply. "Heart rate climbing." Daisy's breath hitched. "Mommy, I don't feel good," she whimpered. I I can't breathe right. Stop the transfusion, Dr. Hartsfield ordered. Get me epi and steroids. Now. The room snapped into motion. Lisa's world narrowed to the sight of her daughter's chest rising too fast, the sound of the alarms grinding against her nerves. Is she rejecting it? Lisa choked out. Is that what this is? She's having an acute reaction, the doctor said, already pushing medication into the line. We're treating it. Daisy's skin flushed, then went frighteningly pale. Her small hand clawed for Lisa's. Mommy, she gasped. It hurts. I know, baby. I know, Lisa said, voice shaking. Betty was wide awake now, eyes huge, tears streaming silently as she watched her twin fight. Don't you dare, Daisy, she whispered. Don't you dare leave me. Machine screamed. BP 70 over 40. Come on, Dr. Hartsfield muttered under his breath. Come on, sweetheart. Work with us. Down the hall, Carl heard it. The alarms, the change in footsteps, the tone in voices that said something was wrong. Tell me, he demanded, forcing himself upright despite the white-hot pain lancing through his back. What's happening? A nurse hesitated. Your younger daughter, she said carefully. She's having a reaction to the transfusion. That was all he heard. He ripped the blood pressure cuff from his arm, fought through the spin of the room, and swung his legs over the side of the bed. Mr. Brown, you cannot. But he was already moving. Every step was agony. But it was nothing compared to the thought of Daisy's small body rejecting what he'd given her. Rejecting him. He stumbled down the corridor, one hand pressed to the wall, vision tunneling. When he reached the transplant unit, a staff member moved to block him. Sir, you can't be in here. My daughter is in there, he snarled. Move. Something in his voice, raw, unpolished, made the nurse step aside. He reached the doorway of the transfusion room, just in time to see chaos. Daisy's bed surrounded, Dr. Hartsfield at her side. Nurses trading syringes in practiced panic. Lisa pinned near the head of the bed, one hand on her daughter's hair, the other clamped over her own mouth to keep from screaming. Betty's bed on the other side, her body shaking with sobs, tethered to her own transfusion she couldn't escape. Daisy, Carl choked, trying to push further into the room. Out, a nurse ordered. Infection control. That's my child. Dr. Hartsfield didn't look up. Stabilizing, he said through clenched teeth. Come on, there we go. Heart rate slowing. BP creeping up. The screaming alarms lowered to an urgent beep. Daisy's frantic breaths slowed, though each one still sounded like a battle. We're stopping for now, he told the team. We'll resume at a slower rate if she tolerates the next few minutes. Eyes on her. No one leaves. Lisa sagged in relief, her knees buckling. A nurse helped her stay upright. Carl's hand hit the door frame to keep from falling. Is she? He rasped. Dr. Hartsfield finally looked over, eyes tired but calmer. She's with us, he said. For now. That was a close call. We'll need to go slower. Watch her like a hawk. But she's stabilized. Carl let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. His back throbbed, his legs trembled. None of it mattered. He'd given them his marrow. Now their small bodies had to decide whether to accept it. Whether to accept him? What you just watched is what most people never see. The cost of redemption when it stops being poetic and becomes physical. The moment where I'm sorry has to travel through a needle and into a vein and meet a body that has every right to say, no. If you're still here, it means you care about this family. You care about Daisy's fight, about Betty's quiet terror, about Lisa's exhausted courage, and yes, even about whether Carl deserves the second chance he's bleeding for. So do something that keeps stories like this alive. Like this video if your heart was in your throat during that reaction. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what comes next, because recovery isn't instant, and consequences don't disappear just because someone finally did the right thing. There's still more to face. Guilt, healing, and the question of what a family looks like after the apology becomes real. Stay. You're part of this now. Daisy's breathing stayed ragged but steady. Betty watched her sister like she could will her to stay with them. Lisa stood between the beds, one hand on each daughter, holding on for all three of them. In the doorway, Carl clung to the frame, his own body screaming, his heart finally learning what it meant to break for someone else before itself. She was stable, but only just. Day 3 after the transplant, Daisy's fever finally broke. It happened just before dawn. The monitors still hummed their low electronic song. The hallway lights dimmed. The world narrowed to room 447 and the two small figures sleeping in their beds. Carl had dozed off in the chair between them, his back and hips still aching from the marrow extraction, when he felt a light tug on his sleeve. "Daddy," Daisy whispered, voice hoarse but clearer. "I'm hot." He jolted awake and fumbled for the call button. A nurse hurried in, checked the thermometer, then smiled in a way Lisa hadn't seen in weeks. 99.2, she said. Down from 102.8. That's a good sign. Lisa pressed her palm to Daisy's forehead, and for the first time, it wasn't burning. Betty, in the next bed, blinked awake. "Is she better?" "We're moving in the right direction," the nurse said. "Both of you are." For the first time since the diagnosis, hope didn't feel like an act of defiance. It felt like a possibility. Recovery wasn't a straight climb. There were days when Daisy's energy crashed and Betty's counts dipped. Days of nausea, bone-deep fatigue, and tears over simple things like not being able to taste food properly. But there were also days when the color returned to their cheeks. When Betty asked for books instead of pain meds. When Daisy sat up for longer than 15 minutes without needing to lie down. Through it all, Carl showed up. Every single day. He arrived in the mornings with coffee for Lisa and juice for the girls. Despite the fact that his own body still felt like someone had dug into his bones with a drill, he stayed until the nurses gently suggested he rest, then left only long enough to shower and change before coming back. He read to them mystery novels for Betty, picture books, and silly stories for Daisy when the chemo fog made longer plots too hard. He learned which nurse was soft with the needle and which one to distract Daisy from. He sat through family therapy sessions where a gentle counselor asked hard questions like, "What did it feel like when he wasn't there? And what does safety mean to you now?" He listened, really listened, and he didn't flinch. One afternoon, 2 weeks post-transplant, Daisy asked for paper and crayons. "Not the cheap ones," she told Lisa. "The good ones Daddy got." Carl's heart lurched at that. Daddy, said so casually, as if it had always been his name. He pulled the art box from the shelf and set it up on the rolling tray. "What are you drawing?" he asked. "You'll see," she said, tongue poking out in concentration. For 20 solid minutes, she drew. Little hands moving steadily, lines firm despite the lingering tremors of weakness. When she finished, she turned the paper around and held it up. It was the 4 of them on the hospital beds: Betty, Daisy, Lisa, and Carl. They were sitting on a porch under a sunset, holding hands. Daisy had written carefully under each figure, "Me, Daddy, Betty, Mommy." At the bottom, in slightly wobbly letters, she'd added, "Our future." Carl blinked hard. "You like it?" she asked. He cleared his throat. "It's beautiful. Can I keep it?" "It's for your new house," Daisy said simply. "So, you remember to put a porch." Betty snorted. "We're not picking his house based on a porch." "A little bit we are," Daisy argued. "We have to have somewhere to sit and look at the sky." Carl looked over at Lisa, who had turned her face away for a moment, wiping her eyes. She had seen him change not in some cinematic overnight transformation, but gradually, the way he no longer checked his phone every 5 minutes. The way he'd stopped talking about the board and started talking about bedtime routines and school schedules. The way he leaned forward when the girls spoke, as if everything they said mattered. Because now, it did. A week later, Melissa appeared in the doorway of room 447, leaning casually against the frame, but her eyes were anything but casual. "Look at you," she said to the twins, smiling wide. "You two are starting to look like trouble again." "Hi, Aunt Mel," Betty said. "We're almost bionic now." Daisy nodded solemnly. "We have Daddy's cells. We're like superheroes." Melissa laughed, then glanced at Carl. "Got a minute?" she asked. He followed her into the hallway. She folded her arms. "So, you didn't implode?" Not yet, he said. You also didn't run. I told you I wouldn't. She studied him. You know, if you'd asked me a year ago whether Carl Brown would ever sit in a pediatric ward drawing pictures with 9-year-olds, I would have bet my car against it. I wouldn't have taken that bet, he said. I'd have agreed with you. So what changed? She asked. He sighed. I saw them. Sometimes it really was that simple. Melissa nodded slowly. I've watched Lisa for 9 years, she said. Birthdays where she tried to make it feel like you weren't missing. Parent-teacher nights she went to alone. Nights she cried in my kitchen and said she was tired of being strong. Carl's jaw tightened. I can't undo any of that, he said. No, Melissa agreed. You can't. But you also can't pretend it didn't happen. So, I'm going to say this once. She stepped closer, her voice low and deadly serious. If you hurt them again, those girls, or Lisa, I will make it my personal mission to make sure you feel it in every corner of your glittering life. Not as revenge, as balance. I'm not leaving, he said. People say that all the time, she shot back. You've said it before. The difference is what they do when nobody's watching. He met her gaze. I sold the penthouse, he said. I put in my transition notice with the board. I'm stepping down within 6 months. I'm not going back to what I was. That caught her off guard. You did what? I can't be half in, he said. Not with them. Not with her. I tried to keep my old life and just add them on like a side project. It doesn't work. They're not a side project. They're the main thing. Melissa's face shifted, skepticism slowly giving way to something like respect. Okay, she said finally. Then prove it. Every day. For the next year. And the year after that. And the 10 after that. I intend to, he replied. She nodded once. Good. Because they deserve someone who stays. By week 5, the girls were back to arguing over small things, a sure sign they were healing. Mom, Betty complained one afternoon, Daisy's hogging the window side. I'm smaller, Daisy argued. I need sun to grow. You're not a plant, Betty shot back. You just want to see if there's a dog in the courtyard. There might be, Daisy said. Carl watched them bicker, a soft smile tugging at his mouth. He'd thought he wanted quiet all these years. Now, the sound of their silly squabbles felt like music. Lisa caught the look. You okay? She asked. I almost missed this, he said simply. You did miss a lot, she replied, not unkindly, just truthfully. I know, he said. I'm trying not to miss the rest. Discharge day came sooner than Lisa trusted and later than the girls wanted. Dr. Hartsfield walked in with a stack of paperwork and a smile. Well, he said, their counts are holding. Engraftment looks solid. No major complications since Daisy's reaction. I'm comfortable sending them home. Home? Daisy breathed. With conditions, he finished. Masks in crowded places. No school for a while. We'll arrange home tutoring. Regular checkups. Meds on schedule. But yes. Home. Betty whooped, then winced and clutched her side. Worth it, she muttered. Lisa covered her mouth with one hand. Carl just stared at the doctor like he'd spoken another language. They're safe? He asked. As safe as medicine can ever say, Dr. Hartsfield replied. We'll watch them carefully. But right now, we celebrate. That night, after the girls fell asleep amid half-packed bags and discharge instructions, Carl found Lisa standing by the window, looking out over the city. You did it, he said quietly. She huffed a small laugh. No, we did it. He stepped beside her, leaving a respectful distance. When they go home, he began, I don't want to go back to just being the man who visits the hospital, or the occasional weekend dad they see on some schedule. I want to be there. Really there. She didn't answer right away. What does that mean to you? She asked finally. It means I find a place nearby, he said. Not some fortress in the sky. A real house. Or at least a real home. With a room for each of them. It means school drop-offs, doctor's appointments, meetings with teachers. It means being the emergency contact form they actually call. It means Christmas mornings and boring Tuesdays. You know, boring Tuesdays are where people fail, right? She said. Not in the big speeches. I've had enough speeches, he replied. I'm done performing. I just want a life. With them, if you'll let me be in it. She searched his face. I'm not promising you anything, she said. I can't flip a switch and forget what you did, and I won't let you drift in and out. If you come in, you stay in. I know, he said. And I'm asking anyway. She took a breath. I'm not saying yes, she said slowly. But I'm not saying no either. That was more than he'd expected, less than he wanted, exactly what he'd earned. Then I'll show you, he said. Not today, not tomorrow, over time. She nodded, eyes shining. Time, she said. He winced. This time, she added. Time's not your excuse. It's your test. He smiled faintly. Fair. Discharge morning was chaotic in the best way. There were forms to sign, meds to review, instructions to ignore Google and call the clinic instead. Nurses came by to hug the girls. Sandra slipped them extra stickers. A volunteer brought one last stack of coloring pages for the road. The girls changed into real clothes, leggings, and soft t-shirts that didn't tug on tender skin. Carl carried their bags down to the car, then came back for them. Betty walked slowly but on her own, chin tilted up like she was walking out of a battlefield victorious. Daisy leaned on Lisa, still a little unsteady, but her eyes were bright. At the hospital entrance, they paused. Say goodbye, Lisa told them. Goodbye, beeping machines, Daisy said. Goodbye, gross jello, Betty added. Goodbye. Room 447, Daisy whispered. Thank you. They stepped out into the sunlight. It felt like stepping into another life. The drive home was quiet, the good kind of quiet. The kind filled with small sighs and sleepy murmurs and the rustle of snack wrappers. Carl followed behind in his own car, giving them space but staying close. When they pulled into the apartment complex, he parked and got out, suddenly unsure. He watched as Lisa helped the girls out of the car as they looked up at their building like it was both familiar and brand new. Betty turned back. Aren't you coming? She asked. He swallowed. If I'm invited. Daisy rolled her eyes in a perfect imitation of her sister. Duh. You have to see our room. Lisa stood there for a beat. Keys in her hand. Eyes on his. Then she lifted her chin toward the stairs. Come on then, she said. Welcome to the real world. They climbed together. At the door to 2B, Lisa hesitated for just a second, then opened it wide. Come in, she said. And he did. Into the home his daughters had grown up in. Into the life he'd walked away from. Into a second chance that was no longer theoretical. It was messy, small, imperfect. And for the first time in his life, it felt exactly right. The first thing Carl noticed inside Lisa's apartment was the banner. It stretched crookedly across one wall in the living room, written in colorful marker and decorated with uneven hearts and stars. Welcome home to us. Below it, squeezed in like a stubborn afterthought, were smaller words. And to Daddy, too. His breath caught. You did this? He asked. Me and Daisy and Aunt Jo, Betty said, trying to sound casual but unable to hide the pride in her voice. Melissa helped with the tape. Mommy kept telling us not to push the chairs too close to the wall. Daisy tugged his sleeve. Do you like it? I love it, he said, and meant every syllable. The living room was small, but full of life. A couch that had seen years of movie nights. A scuffed coffee table with faint crayon marks. A bookshelf overflowing with paperbacks and school folders. A plant in the corner doing its best under inconsistent watering. It wasn't a penthouse. It was a home. Okay, Betty announced, clapping once. Agenda time. There's an agenda? Carl asked, amused. There's always an agenda, Lisa muttered, heading for the kitchen. She gets that from you. Betty cleared her throat, unfolding a piece of lined paper. Item 1. Welcome snacks. Item 2. Presents. Item 3. Porch time. Porch time? Carl asked. You'll see, Daisy said mysteriously. Lisa came back with a plate of crackers and apple slices and set them on the coffee table. "This is what we've got," she said, a little apologetic. "It's perfect," Carl replied, and it was, because they were here to eat it. When everyone had settled the girls on the couch, Carl, in the extra chair, dragged from the kitchen. Lisa, on the arm of the sofa. Betty tapped her paper. "Item 2, she said. "Presents." Daisy whispered loudly. "This is the good part." Carl took a breath. "I brought something for you both," he said, reaching for the bag he'd left by the door. He handed the first wrapped package to Betty. She peeled the paper back with exaggerated slowness, as if she were above the excitement but absolutely not speeding up. Inside was a dark blue journal, constellations scattered in gold across the cover. At the bottom, her name was embossed. Betty Blake, stories worth telling. Her fingers traced the letters. "It's just a notebook," she said. But her voice was soft. "It's not just a notebook," Carl said. "It's for every story you're going to write now that you're healthy enough to stay up too late thinking them up. Mysteries, adventures, whatever you want. You said you wanted to be a writer. Writers need somewhere to put the words." She swallowed. "You remembered," she murmured. "Of course." Daisy bounced a little. "My turn?" He grinned and handed her the second package. She tore it open in 2 quick motions. Inside was a wooden art box with compartments. When she opened it, her eyes went wide. Colored pencils, watercolors, brushes, sketch pads. Enough color to fill 100 pages. "These are the good ones," she breathed. "I know," he said. "They're for every new day we get together." "All of them?" she asked. "Every single one." She launched herself forward, wrapping her arms around his middle as much as her recovering body allowed. "Thank you, Daddy." The words settled over the room, not as a surprise now, but as something that finally fit. "You're welcome," he whispered, hugging her gently. "Thank you for letting me be here to give it." When she let go, she set the art box carefully beside her like it was made of glass. "Okay," Betty said, suddenly shy but determined. "Our turn." She nodded to Daisy, who reached under the coffee table and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "We made you something," Daisy said. "Together." He took it carefully and unfolded it. It was another drawing. 4 figures sitting on a porch, 2 adults, 2 children. A sunset behind them, the sky streaked with orange and pink. Under each figure, Daisy's familiar, careful handwriting. "Me, Daddy, Betty, Mommy." At the bottom, in slightly shakier letters, 1 line. "Our family." He couldn't speak for a moment. "You like it?" Daisy asked, suddenly uncertain. "It's the best thing anyone has ever given me," he said, voice thick. "I'll put it where I can see it every day." "In your new house," Betty said. "The one with the porch. You promised." "I'm looking," he replied. "And it will have a porch. Non-negotiable." Lisa huffed out a quiet laugh. "Good," Daisy said, satisfied. "Because we have to have somewhere to sit." "Which brings us to agenda item 3, Betty announced. "Porch time." The balcony wasn't much. Just a narrow strip of concrete with a simple railing and a view of the courtyard below patchy grass, a few trees, a couple of old swing sets. But someone had put a lot of effort into making it enough. A blanket was spread on the floor. 2 mismatched chairs were pulled up. A string of cheap fairy lights was taped along the railing, not yet turned on, waiting for the sun to go down. "This is where we come when it's too noisy inside," Lisa explained. "Or when we need air. Or when Daisy wants to count dogs. You can see everything from up here," Daisy said, settling onto the blanket. "Kids, birds, sometimes the ice cream truck." Betty flopped down beside her, journal tucked under her arm. Carl sat carefully, his healing back protesting but not enough to make him stop. Lisa took one of the chairs, leaning back, watching them. They passed the plate of crackers around. It wasn't a feast. It wasn't a movie ending with champagne and fireworks. It was better. It was real. "What are you going to write first?" Carl asked Betty. She thought for a long moment. "A story where the dad comes back," she said finally. "And stays. Even when it's boring. Even when it's hard." Sounds like a bestseller, he replied quietly. Daisy, he asked, what about you? What's the first thing you're going to draw with the fancy paints? She tilted her head back, looking at the sky. This, she said. Us. Right now. So I don't forget what it felt like. When we weren't in the hospital anymore. Lisa watched their faces in the slanting light, their daughters between them, the four of them in a crooked little circle on that cracked porch. She remembered the girl she'd been when she met Carl, the woman she'd become when he left, the mother she'd had to be when there was no one else. She looked at him now. He was still himself, sharp lines, controlled movements, but softer somehow, less armored. There was a permanent ache in his eyes that hadn't been there before, the kind that comes from finally understanding what you've done and choosing, every day, to do better. Can I ask you something? He said quietly. Once the girls were focused on the sky and their snacks. She nodded. If I mess up, he said, and I will, because I'm human and new at this. Will you tell me? Before it becomes 9 years of silence? She exhaled. I'll tell you, she said. But you have to listen. Really listen. Not like a CEO. Like a father. Like a partner. If we ever get there again. He nodded. I will. And you? She asked. If you're overwhelmed. If you feel that old urge to run creeping in, I'll come here, he said. And sit on this porch. And remember what almost didn't happen. I won't run from this again, Lisa. I swear it. Her eyes filled. Then don't leave, she whispered, the words catching. Not ever again. He looked at her, really looked at her. Not as someone from his past. Not as a problem to solve. But as the woman who'd carried his children, raised them alone, and somehow still had space in her heart for these moments. I won't, he said. Not unless you tell me to. And even then, I'll probably still be sitting in the parking lot. She laughed through her tears. Fair. The sun sank lower, painting the courtyard gold. Daisy's head found Carl's shoulder, her eyes heavy. Betty leaned against his other side, quietly flipping open her journal, scribbling a title at the top of the first page. Her twins needed bone marrow. She tapped her pen thoughtfully. And then what? She murmured. Then, Carl said softly, their father finally showed up. Lisa watched them. The two girls pressed in close to the man who had once chosen a boardroom over a family, now choosing this porch over everything else. For the first time in 9 long years, the tightness in her chest eased. This wasn't perfection. There were still apologies unspoken, wounds not fully healed, trust that would have to be built brick by brick. But there was also this. 4 people on a small balcony watching the sunset. A mother who could finally exhale. A father who had finally learned how to stay. 2 daughters who no longer had to ask if they were wanted. Carl looked at all of them and felt a peace he'd never found in quarterly reports or magazine covers. I won't lose this again, he whispered. Daisy murmured something sleepy and tucked herself closer. Betty smiled, just a little, and kept writing. Lisa leaned back in her chair, hand resting over her heart, and let the moment fill every empty place that had been waiting for it. The fairy lights flicked on as the sun dipped below the horizon, and in that gentle glow, a family that should have broken stayed seated together, not because everything had been perfect, but because, finally, they had all chosen to stay.